A ghostly encounter at Goulet's funeral home. I'll never forget the evening I attended Great Aunt Lucy's wake at Goulet's funeral home in Renfrew, back in the 1970s. It was early June, and the air was just starting to warm after the long, cool spring. Yet, despite the time of year, the evening sky was a heavy slate gray, weighed down by thick, motionless clouds. As my family and I made our way into the funeral home, a light breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and garden flowers, the sweetness almost cloying in the somber mood of the night. Lucy had passed away peacefully at the age of 75. She had lived a good life, her heart and home always open to others, so it was no surprise that relatives from across Renfrew County and beyond had come to pay their respects. There was quiet speculation among the mourners as to what had taken her in the end. My mother, too, had her suspicions, though she never spoke of it. She seemed to know more than she let on, as though there was some unspoken understanding between her and Lucy that would go with them to the grave. The interior of Goulet's was warm, almost too warm. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut flowers, lilies, roses, carnations, and the low hum of whispered condolences filled the room. I found myself standing before Lucy's casket, gazing at her still, peaceful face. She looked almost as if she were asleep, her white hair neatly arranged, her hands clasped over a rosary. I began to whisper the Catholic prayer for the recently deceased, followed by a quiet Hail Mary, my voice barely audible in the heavy air. Afterward, I offered my sympathies to Lucy's children and grandchildren, who stood in a line nearby, pale and quiet with grief. The whole process was familiar and comforting in its solemnity, but there was something else, a subtle unease in the atmosphere, a coldness that seemed to seep into the room despite its oppressive warmth. After about an hour of sitting with my immediate family, my cousins Jerry and Ronnie, unable to sit still any longer, suggested we head down to the basement. There was a small room down there where people could have a cigarette and a cup of coffee. I didn't smoke, but the promise of coffee and a break from the growing tension upstairs was appealing, so I agreed to join them. As they made their way down the creaky carpeted stairs, I lingered at the top for a moment. That's when I noticed him, a tall, elderly man standing in the narrow hallway near the stairwell. He was dressed in a dark suit, the kind men had worn in the 1950s or 60s, with neatly combed gray hair. His posture was rigid, hands at his sides, and for a moment I thought he might be another mourner, perhaps someone I hadn't met before, a distant cousin or friend of Lucy's. I was about to call out a greeting when I felt it, a sudden drop in temperature. The warmth of the funeral home vanished in an instant, replaced by a bone-chilling cold that seemed to freeze the air around me. I shivered, crossing my arms instinctively, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Something about the man's presence unsettled me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. "Good evening," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. But the man didn't respond. He simply stared at me, his expression blank, before slowly beginning to walk in my direction. His shoes made no sound on the carpeted floor, and though his steps were measured, almost deliberate, there was something unnatural about the way he moved. My heart began to race as he drew nearer, an inexplicable fear creeping up my spine. And then, just as he reached the top of the stairs, he vanished. One moment, he was there, and the next, he was gone, dissolving into the air like smoke in the wind. I blinked in disbelief, frozen in place. My legs felt weak, and it took all my strength to steady myself before stumbling down the stairs to join Jerry and Ronnie. In the basement, the atmosphere was entirely different, warmer, more relaxed. My cousins were chatting with other relatives, laughing and smoking, seemingly unaware of the eerie encounter I had just experienced. When I recounted the strange event, they simply laughed it off, teasing me for having seen a ghost. Later that evening, when I told my mother what had happened, her reaction was far more serious. She listened quietly, her brow furrowing with concern. Then, without a word, she reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. "Was this the man you saw?" she asked. her voice barely above a whisper as she handed me the picture. I stared down at the faded photograph, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a black and white picture of Great Aunt Lucy and her late husband, Great Uncle Albert, taken sometime in the 1940s. My mouth went dry, and the room seemed to spin. It was him, the man in the hallway. It was Albert. I had never met him, of course. He had passed away in 1966, when I was just an infant, too young to remember. But there was no mistaking it. I had seen his ghost. On that strange, unsettling night in Renfrew, Great Uncle Albert had come back, it seemed, to welcome his beloved Lucy home. This ghost tale was produced by Rick J.M. Gauthier, the up-and-coming Canadian author of the Little Ricky the Boy, Little Ricky the Lad, and Little Ricky the Young Man collections of short stories. This ghost story is based upon known facts about hauntings in and around Renfrew. Little Ricky short stories can be purchased from Amazon and Kobo. Amazon has paperbacks and ebooks. Kobo has audiobooks. If you buy a short story, all proceeds are donated to a food bank. Books are not expensive. Some are as low as $6. Consider helping Rick get established as an author by supporting him with a purchase and a review. Consider helping Rick to feed the hungry.